Hello, David. Thank you so much for being here. We're
Hey,
here
Mike.
to talk about your book that you wrote with your daughter and wife, The Great Fire, A Tale of Trust and Courage. And David we were just discussing, this is his fourth time. He's the fourth time guest. He's the founder of Powerful and Loving, PAL, where good men grow in deeper relationship and leadership. And I am so happy to be doing this again. So, David, tell us a little bit maybe about yourself, what brings you here, and then we can get into your book.
Oh, Mike. I think the big thing is I just love spending time with you. And this book is really important to me because I've ever since I was little, I watched how stories shape humanity. I grew up in Czechoslovakia under communism, and how stories weave together society, how we see ourselves as individuals, being a psychotherapist, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, the stories we tell about our relationships, about our families, about our work, about our purpose. It shapes who we are. We're a storytelling breed. And right now in history, there's so many stories that I think are toxic politically to our, making us sick, making us angry, exhausted, depressed. And there are so many stories out there that are entertaining or escape or like fun. But it's rarer to find stories, I find, especially looking for my daughter, who loves stories. She reads so many books that we had to expand our bookshelves in the living room. We actually had to tear out a wall so we could fit more books because she loves stories so much. But like the quality of stories, like what are the stories about, and what do they evoke, and do they awaken the soul, the spirit in us, or are they just there to try to promote some point of view, some belief, or stories are very powerful. I think our psyches are shaped by story. So I'm coming at it with that, and the story that we told, my wife, my daughter, and I, is there's a story behind the story of how it got told. It almost didn't get told. It took 2 years to get it to completion, and there's a story of how it got picked up by Magic Kids, a publishing company, and there's a lot to it. But I just love awakening people to the reality of what stories are you listening to, watching, reading, what stories are you believing, and are they serving you? Are they helping you to connect to something deeper in yourself and in humanity, or are they reinforcing the things you've been taught that you're supposed to keep doing? And then the extra layers as a man at midlife, I find that a lot of the things that I was taught about myself and about society, about even my profession, don't hold really good water as you get older. You start to see all the holes in those stories. And I look for richer, deeper stories that help to explain how things really work, and why are we really here?
Yeah, I want to ask you two questions. One is, yeah, what is the backstory of how you and your family decided to do that, like write the book, and where it all came from? The other question was maybe a little more philosophical. Yuval Noah Harari, who's a historian, he's a
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness guy too, although he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really write about that. But he calls us storytelling chimpanzees. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love that. And when I'm with clients, often the question I ask a lot is, what is the story you're telling yourself about that? What's going on in there? All that kind of thing. So maybe that's more of a commentary. I don't know, but can you tell us, I guess, yeah, about how your family decided to write the book and what the roots of that were?
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but my parents are getting older and they're very vibrant. But I lost my grandmother a few years ago, and I keep losing uncles and people in my life. And so at first I wanted to honor my family and our migration story, how we got from Europe to North America. We were refugees. We escaped from communism. So I thought there's a story there, right? And how do I convey that to my daughter? and to the younger generation of my nieces and nephews. And um, so there was a desire to honor that story. There was also the greater story of climate change right now, which I don't feel like we're wrestling with enough as families. We're feeling the anxiety of it as parents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And kids are hearing about it in school, obviously. But it's pretty insane about what's going on to the planet, and also politically what's happening in the world. So how do we wrestle with all of those themes, those realities, instead of just sheltering our kids into a little bubble of happy stories? So it's like, okay, so want to tell those stories. My wife got on board with the honoring the family and the climate change. We're big on cultivating a relationship to nature. My wife has a garden that's a mentoring garden. She grows food and teaches people to connect to nature through a company called Wild by Nature. So it's really important to us, our relationship to nature. And then Sophia got roped in. She's 12 years old, and she has a gift for stories, as I mentioned, right? She loves stories, and she's written stories herself. So we thought, okay, it's going to be an animal story, animal tale. And I grew up in the West Coast, so it's going to happen in the West Coast. There's such an incredible biodiversity there, right? The rainforest, and there's a threat. There's a threat of a great fire. But it starts with an old owl with one eye who has a vision that a great fire is coming and it's going to decimate the whole area. And what does she do with that? What do you do with that when you have a foreknowing that bad things are going to happen? How do you wrestle with that? Do you go crazy? Do you become paranoid? Do you try to, run around screaming to everybody? I think that's what climate change. Like, we can see where we're going, right? And it's not good. It's not going to get better in the short term. So what do we do with that information? So she goes around trying to tell the other animals, and it's quite interesting to imagine how different animals have different perspectives, different human beings have different perspectives. So we tried to flesh out in the first chapter, what are all the different reactions to someone telling you there's a great fire coming, there's danger, we have to respond, and you don't see anything. And it's like, oh, it looks fine. It's or it doesn't look as bad, or it's far away, and there's all these kind of reactions, and then the characters start to shape and form of the bunny, the wolf, the bear, the lynx, all with like very unique perspectives that are all valuable. And then we wrote most of the story. It was harrowing. Like, we would sit down as a family trying to write. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do anything as a family and agree. It's really hard, right? It's really hard to collaborate. There's a lot of creative tension. This is too intense. You should make this. No, I don't like that. And we tried to bring our arguments into the story between the characters. I brought in my parents and my family members to be different characters in the story. I wrote them in that way. And at one point we reached this kind of impasse, like 2/3 of the way through the story. The story was so good. I was like dreaming about it. And at one point my wife and my daughter said, no, it's too much work. We're fighting all the time. It's too hard. We don't want to work on it. So we took a pause, and then I kept wanting to come back, and they didn't want to come back. They got, life takes over. It's busy. So this was like months in, and I didn't want to just write it myself. So we went through a sort of second phase, months of pausing and then coming back to it, where I started to tease them with the parts of the story that I could foresee. And then they started filling in the blanks, and then they started giving me input, and we went back to the drawing board and we finished the story. And when we finished it, we just felt it was so live, this story. My favorite stories are the ones where there's multiple perspectives. There isn't like one moral or one angle. You're just seeing the world through 17 different sets of eyes, and it enriches your perspective of what life is, right? Like the work of Emile Zola or Charles Dickens or all these like great authors, right? They just, every character, even if we hate a character, you can kind of understand where they're coming from. It has that compassion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like that was hard to write, but it was so satisfying to read, And so then we started recording the audio. We was like, we have to make this into an audio play. People are so busy. So we started doing the characters. We did like half of it. And then my friend Bradley T. Morris, he is an incredible entrepreneur and creative. He's a fellow golfer. He's a father. He runs several companies. He lives on a little island with his family out west in BC. And I sent it to him because he started a publishing company for kids, but for little kids, right? 4, 5, 6 years old. And I thought, oh, maybe Bradley will like this. And he read it to his son, who's 6 years old, and they loved it. They thought it was incredible. They liked the themes, but they had one critique. And I was kind of like waiting for that critique. And he said, well, it's not funny enough. His son said, it's not funny enough. And I was like, it's a climate change epic adventure story, which is, we hit all those notes. I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but then I sat with that and I realized it has to have humor. Even when the world is burning, we have to laugh at humanity, our own hubris, our own like eccentricities, and laugh in a way where it's like, oh, I'm not laughing down at you. It's just like, yeah, this is being in denial of a fire that's coming to, there's something about it that's comical and tragic, right? And there's something about all of us that's a little bit comic tragic. So we spent another 6 months rewriting. And this time we went, comedy, I think good comedy means you go deeper into humanity. You go deeper into really trying to understand these characters. And that is what happened. We started finding the humor in odd moments, and we rewrote the whole thing. And then they gave us the full thumbs up. They hired 26 voice actors, and they started recording. And that took months and months, and here we are. It's done. It's 90 minutes. It's an audio play. Bradley calls it a movie for your ears. I think it hits all the notes. It's got humor. It's got adventure, and it touches on those big things. What does it mean to have to leave your home, to sacrifice all the things you've been working towards your whole life and leave them behind, to trust people that are very different than you, that you don't agree with at all in their perspective, but you have to band together. And can incredible things happen when people work together? Absolutely. It's all in the story. So, and there was one last thing I want to say is the joy for me was, as we were writing the story, after the second chapter, we had no idea where it's going to go. We kind of knew we wanted to not have a terrible, miserable ending, but good stories just take over and they start writing themselves. That kind of tell you what needs to happen. You're not in control. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it is one thing quickly is you do have experience writing. You've written 2 books as far as I know.
Yeah.
And I think you said you're writing another one, and your ability to kind of craft those things has been honed, or is being honed and sort of practiced, which I think sometimes I forget things. If you want to be good at something or create things that are good, you need to practice. This is a bit of a side note. I'm curious about the climate change thing, the different perspectives, the different way people react to things, because I think that's a nice description as to what's actually happening out there in the world and how people relate to this reality that I think most people can acknowledge and accept, right? The degree of the problem is debated, I guess, and you see it all around. So, and sometimes from day to day, I may have a totally different reaction to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the more I sit with people in a therapy context, the more I am reminded of how our brain is conditioned to worry, right? And to be fearful and to kind of catastrophize and all these things. Mm-hmm. And that, with all humanity's problems, I think it actually brings me contentment or solace knowing that, yes, we have all these problems and things we must address.
Mm.
And I think collectively, most of us tell stories about these problems in ways that just aren't helpful and aren't per se, not so much that they're not true, but like, with the climate change thing, like people are, as you kind of were describing, people get fanatical or they get hysterical or they get dismissive or they get whatever. And none of that's helpful, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I just kind of wonder if you could comment on that and how you tried to bring that out through the characters. And maybe the last thing I would say is, we can remove all the sort of political jargon and commentary from someone like Elon Musk, but he is like the super doer kind of person, right? The things that he's created are mind boggling. So that's the thing for me when I get into the hysteria. It's sort of, well, what can I do right now? Or what can I help contribute to as a potential solution or as a potential, or maybe I'm not equipped to do that. So how can I perhaps encourage others to, or provide resources or energy or whatever to help other people who are much more equipped to address this issue than me. So that was a little bit of a kind of long-winded, multiple question commentary, but yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there is. So, yeah.
Well, first, I think there's a couple of things that strike me when you ask that question. One is there's always wisdom in the commons is always greater than in the individual. No matter how brilliant one person might be, they're really biased and clueless and misinformed in so many ways, right? Because we only have one perspective. When you band people together with a problem and you bond them with a problem, then you have multiple solutions that usually to solve big problems, you need multiple solutions. It's not one step, one solution. It takes everyone's hands on deck. Climate change was like that. Dismantling communism was like that. Fighting fascism is like that. Everything that's big and scary and difficult takes many people, many generations sometimes of work, right? And you have to work with people who are different, who oppose your view, don't agree with you. How do you do that?
Yeah.
I mean,
how do you do that, David?
Most of us as adults, we don't know.
Yeah.
And so, but stories have clues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And stories can inspire us to see that it's possible. And sometimes the way that solutions arrive is chaotic and unexpected. That's the reality, right? Like when they studied problem solving, I think it was at MIT or some famous Cambridge or somewhere. They took like the smartest MBA types and build this structure, and they took 5-year-olds, build the same structure. And the MBA types were very thoughtful, planned, intelligent. They studied architecture, and they didn't have as good a solution as the 5-year-olds. The 5-year-olds were chaotic. They shouted at each other. They wrestled with it. They tried 100 things. They kept trying different things, and they came up with novel solutions that were more robust. Right? So I think there's a metaphor for stepping into story and our deeper instincts when we work together with people, when we wrestle with them, when we are in tension with them. Something good comes out of it. And when we bifurcate, when we separate people, when we deny people a seat at the table, and we just want to hear people who sound like us, our solutions are very hollow and two-dimensional, right? Or incomplete to be charitable. Yeah. So there's that. I also think when we talk about something like climate change, there's this kind of like either stick your head in the sand ostrich response. It's not happening, or it's not as bad, or all these like mitigating things. Or there's the freak out and start judging everyone who's not freaking out. I've learned a lot from my marriage, in my relationship, where I used to be more like typical male, head in the sand. When my wife brought up something anxiety provoking, it's going to be fine, honey. We're going to get through, I didn't want to deal with the fear. And her response was to sound the alarm. I think what's really, really important, and maybe mindfulness is a real key to this, and also being relational, is every emotion, no matter how difficult or hard to process, has a wisdom to it, and fear has wisdom to it. To be not afraid at this time, I think, is foolish. But holding on to fear is also harmful. So there's this paradox. If I deny the feelings of outrage and fear that I feel at what's happening in the world, then I'm in a real bubble of denial. But if I live in that fear and outrage every day, constantly, I'm getting myself sick. I'm making myself sick, and I'm pushing people away. I'm alienating people. And I think this is where that third path of Buddhism comes in, right? It's like to accept all that my mind and my body creates, the fears, the stories, the images, to see them, accept them for being there, and then to learn to release them. And that's another thing I love about good stories, is that they're not static, they're moving. So no matter where you are in one point of the story, if you continue to read and listen, it moves forward. It teaches you that fear is an appropriate response right now, and a moment later, it's not. We need to move beyond fear. And now it's time to face conflict and turn towards conflict. And now it's time to resolve conflict. For the story to actually be satisfying and complete, it needs to move through everything, right? And I think our nervous system is actually designed to do that. And then our socialization sometimes circumvents that. We're taught not to be afraid, or we're taught not to show feelings or share feelings, or we're not shown how to process them as children and adults. That's my work as a therapist. 95% of the time, I help people to work through feelings, and they know what to do, and they're willing to do it. But when they're stuck with certain feelings, it doesn't matter how much intelligence or willpower they have, right? So it comes to that capacity to accept everything that we're experiencing and that the world is trying to show us, and then the willingness to surrender that there can be a greater reality. There's more to the story,
Mm-hmm.
and there's more to my perspective might feel very lucid and clear, but there's so much more I have to learn if I expand and I listen to yours and to everyone else's.
Yeah, I really like the reminder, again, many things you said of, and this is part of what I was talking about last night with this group of parents, is we're not taught to face the difficult emotions at all. We're taught that it's okay to have them, but we're not taught what to do with them at all. And what you said about sometimes the calling is to face those difficult things and to wrestle and to have conflict and yeah, it's a really nice way to put it, because I think I don't know if this is true. It's just a thought that's coming to me now. Sometimes I think, or I want to stay in that too much. Like, it's okay to have conflict. It's okay to do this. It's okay to be whatever. Yeah. And sometimes I forget that is also not a permanent state, and that it's okay to resolve conflict and to let it go, and to move forward.
Yeah.
And how can you, maybe we could come back to the book a little bit. How does the story get to the conflict, I guess, or I love how you just also had all the different characters with the different perspectives and all that kind of thing. It's super cool. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that? And in the story, how did they?
Yeah, well, I don't want to give away too much.
Okay. But, fair.
It begins with Snowy the owl has a vision. It's terrifying to her, and she feels she has a social conscience, so she feels like she has to tell everybody. And she starts telling different animals, and they all react differently. Dismissive. Some are too busy. Some are just. But a few of them start to listen, and they start to look for evidence, and they find it. There's a fire coming. There's a human-made fire nearby, and it starts to spread, and it grows momentum. If you know about forest fires, a few years ago, actually in BC and in Alberta, they were so powerful that the people who lived through it are still traumatized. And the people who stopped the fires have written about how There was so much like magic and miracle in stopping the fire. There was such a greater chance that it could have taken over and destroyed much more, much more. So there was a confluence of people working together, luck, a lot of things. Because once fires become massive, they're a monster.
Yeah.
So things start to build momentum in the story, and that's the part that's scary. But that's also how life can be, right? Depending on where you are in the world. And the animals start to awaken, and then there's a kind of a tipping point where it's undeniable, but some are still in denial. And it's how relationships, how all these different animals, through empathy, through compassion, through compelling communication, convince more and more of the animals to work together. So it's a gradual story of how do we convince the guy who doesn't want to leave the groundhog who doesn't want to leave the hole because he thinks it's deep enough and he'll be safe.
Right.
How do you get through to his heart? Not just his mind, but his heart, to understand that he needs to get out and he needs to help with everyone else getting out, that was the great challenge of writing the story. And we were really moved by how each character, different characters' voices were needed at different times. One character can convince another character, but then you need the shy little bunny to convince the other character, and you need the moose to step in and say something that no one else has thought of. And that's the power of community, right? The power of collective problem solving, collective thinking. That's reinforced for me personally as the world heats up, as politically we are more threatened, economically we are more unstable. For me and my family, we've come to this conclusion that our response is to double down on community, to not isolate and think we can survive on our own. We can't. It's not just to amass lots of wealth or try to get away to some magical place that can protect us. It's to build community. And in that community, there's resilience, there's strength, there's wisdom that can be cultivated and can be passed on to future generations. So that's the direction that the story goes. And then we found a lot of humor along the way, which I'm so happy about now. When I listen to it, it makes me laugh. There's a scene actually in chapter 1 or 2 where a squirrel does box breathing. That is so funny that people.
I think I think I remember that part. I didn't get through the whole thing, but it's almost like a neurotic little squirrel trying to remind itself, right? Yeah.
I have to be a good parent. I have to provide. Don't tell me this information. I have nothing I can do about it.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, thank you. So I know we got about 20 minutes or so here. My mind wants to ask you multiple questions. Maybe to sort of tie up the discussion of the book, so I can ask you kind of questions outside of that. All the information will be sort of in the show notes of this.
Yeah.
Is there a main audience for it? I know you said the publishing company was for sort of littler kids, but if you were to say kind of who's the main audience? Yeah.
I think it's the perfect story for families to listen to together at bedtime or around dinner, after dinner, to like cozy up. The music is incredible. They did a beautiful job of layering different music throughout it, the character voices. I don't know if people have any kind of association or memory of radio plays, where families used to sit around the fire and listen to a radio play. It's quite magical, actually. Reading the book is one thing. It's not published as a book yet, but to listen to it really comes alive. And so far, we've heard from lots of parents and kids who loved it, and it's allowed them to have conversations they couldn't have. Like, the thing is, kids absorb our anxieties. They absorb what's happening in the world. They're not even young kids. This story was written for even teenagers, right? And adults. But even young kids who don't have the context to understand climate change fully and politically what's happening, they feel it. They feel like something's going on. People are more stressed. People are more frustrated. more scared. They don't know why. So to have a story like this that touches on all these themes makes more context and understanding, and allows parents and kids to have conversations. Say, yeah, the world can be scary. And yeah, we can work together, and we have allies, and we have people we can trust, or we're building trust with neighbors and people, and what would we do if there was a flood or fire? Um, yeah, these are things that we need to talk about, right? Um, so I think that's the perfect vehicle for deeper conversations, and for reassuring yourself and your kids about the resources you do have, the people in your lives that you can come together with and face difficult things with. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been wanting to talk about, I guess, sort of the masculinity discussions going around. I am very grateful that you watched to the end of this video. Please click one of the boxes to watch more of our content, and otherwise have a great day. Peace out.